Good morning. It's great to be with you this morning, and I look forward always to having the opportunity to worship God in God's house and with God's people. Thank you so much for being here. I'd like to point out this morning that of all living things that God created, the only being with cognitive intelligence, cognitive knowledge, the ability to determine virtues and determine right from wrong and so on, is the human being. All in the animal kingdom, other than, of course, the human being created in God's image, all other things are slaves to their instinct. And yet sometimes we pretend as though we too are slaves to our instincts. I could tell you a story about an individual who, following a sermon that I preached, and I'd done the best I could with it. It might not have been very skillfully presented, but I did the best I could with it. Came out and told me in the vestibule, with a vestibule full of people, after I asked him, "How are you this morning? Are you doing well?" He said, "No, I'm not. You made all of us men look like idiots." And he wasn't kidding. He wasn't smiling a bit. Later on, when I had an opportunity to cool down a little bit myself, I talked with him and I suggested to him that that was not a very respectful way to address me, especially with regard to the presentation of the gospel. One who is presenting the gospel, regardless of the quality or lack of it, of the man who's doing the job, that job in and of itself is something that is worthy of respect. And I suggested to him that he had not been very respectful. And his response was this: "Well, I just say whatever is on my mind." And when he said that, I wanted so much to quote a passage from Proverbs. I didn't do it. I resisted the temptation. But I wanted to quote from Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 11, because it says that a fool speaks all his mind, but a wise man holds it back until later. I didn't say that, but I was thinking it. And also I would observe that there have been times when I also have tried to excuse myself from acting in a certain way. And I have probably even verbalized this before and said to people, "Well, I'm sorry, but that's just the way I feel." Now, you've never done that, have you? That's just the way I feel. Now, you know what? A wolf or a rattlesnake could make that excuse. Because they're slaves to the instinct that God has given them, they respond instinctively in such a way as to protect themselves. God didn't gift them, as He gifted me, as He gifted you, with the ability to sit back and consider the other person, to consider other people, to consider God's will, and then make a cognitive, intelligent decision as to what my response is going to be. Brother Neil's been talking about wisdom in his Sunday morning class. Wisdom is that part of the understanding of an individual, of a human being, that determines the virtue and the character of another person. It is able to determine and distinguish various principles when an animal is simply subject to its instinct. It responds instinctively, where I, as a being created in God's image, have been given the gift of wisdom. I may not have as much wisdom as I need. And James says that if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and who upbraideth not. He's not going to make fun of you. He's not going to ridicule you because you have to ask Him for wisdom. Some wisdom comes with experience, but some people, I myself can say this from my own experience, just keep making the same mistakes over and over. There are some things that I've just done over and over, haven't learned a thing from it. You know why? I haven't applied wisdom to that situation. We need wisdom. We need to be able to receive lessons even from things, animals and other things that are beneath us in God's creative order of importance. For instance, when Jesus was teaching, He taught some marvelous lessons, did He not, from the flowers? He said, behold the lilies of the field. Behold the flowers. They don't toil, they don't worry themselves to death, they don't spin. And yet God clothes them, and their clothing is much more marvelous, much more spectacular than the glory of Solomon in all of his glory. He didn't look as pretty as that flower out there growing in God's wild nature. That's the way God created. So you can learn something from that. And the birds of the air, they're not worried to death about tomorrow. They simply stay busy following the instinct that God has given them. And He says you can even learn from the birds of the air. And Jesus used a form of humor, by the way, when He asked people. He said, what about the sparrows? You're worth a lot more than any of them. You're worth a lot more than many sparrows. You're worth a lot more than these little creatures. Don't you know that God cares more about you than He does these sparrows? And He takes care of the sparrows. You can trust God. You can know God cares about you. And you need to live with that within your mind and heart. Now, there are some creatures in God's creation that demonstrate wisdom. That is, they have no innate wisdom themselves, but they teach us, if we observe their behavior, some things that when we practice it and apply it in our lives will result in wise actions that are pleasing in the sight of God. And one such passage that teaches that very plainly, and you might want to turn to this, it's found in Proverbs chapter 30. Proverbs chapter 30. And as I read, I'm reading from the New King James Version. Either during the reading or in a few moments when we review the reading, I'm going to clarify some translation varieties that we see many times and try to give us some insights into that. Beginning with verse 24. There are 4 things which are little on earth, but they are exceedingly wise. In other words, you observe their behavior, you're going to gain some wisdom from doing what they do. And then he tells us what they are. The ants are a people not strong, yet they prepare their food in the summer. They store up their food in the summer. The rock badgers, and that's really an unfortunate picture. You picture a badger, at least I do, as something you don't want to be close to. But a rock badger, what was interpreted and translated rock badger, is maybe better interpreted, better translated a coney, and the literal term is a hyrax. And a hyrax, if you want to see a really cute animal, then look up a picture of a hyrax. They're cute little beings. They're small. They remind me a whole lot. I'm told they're not in the same family, but they remind me a whole lot of a little bunny rabbit. Except they're even smaller than a bunny rabbit, and they're kind of fat and round. And quit pointing at me. They're kind of fat and round, and they have a lot of fur. And that reminds me, a few times someone has asked me, when I'd meet them for the first time, what should I call you? John or Johnny or just what? And I said, well, people call me different things. Some people call me John. Some people call me Johnny. My wife calls me Snuggle Bunny. I'm going to have her change that to hydrax. But it's a cute little animal. A child wouldn't be afraid of a hydrax or a coney that is referred to here. It wouldn't have any way of hurting you. They're sweet little cuddly beings. They're a feeble folk, he says. Yet they make their homes in the crags, in the cliffs, in and under the rocks. Verse 27, the locusts have no king, yet they all advance in ranks. No king, nobody directing them every step of the way, but they advance themselves in ranks. And the spider, and the better translation is lizard. The lizard under consideration here, the word that's used in the Hebrew, represents a little lizard that's about the size of your little pinky. Not very big at all. So it's a small creature, seemingly insignificant creature, but it says that this creature, this lizard, skillfully grasps with its hands, and it is in kings' palaces. Now these are significant statements. First of all, look at the ants. The ants are a people not strong, and yet they store up their food in the summer. They take care of what needs to be taken care of. When ants demonstrate that kind of industry and that kind of foresight, they stay busy storing up the food, making preparation for the future. That shows industry and also foresight. They know there's coming a lean time, and so they take care of business while they can. They know the time of their opportunity. That's a lesson we need to learn. I need that wisdom. I need to take advantage of the time that God has given me, the opportunity that God has given me to make preparation for my life. You know, I guess most of us would agree that youth is the summer of life. Did you make the kind of preparation during your youth that ultimately you would need when you grew older? I didn't. I didn't follow the example of these ants. Had I done so, I'd be a wiser man and in a better position in my life. And every person has his summer. He has his youth. He has those early years. And the summer of life should be used to prepare for the winter of maturity. And that's what he says we can learn, the wisdom we can gain. Proverbs 6:6, go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Calling someone a sluggard is not a compliment. That means you lazy thing, get up and get moving. Go to the ant, you sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. That's what Jesus did. He knew that his messianic schedule would allow him only a little time here on earth. And in John chapter 9 and verse 4, he said, I must work the works of the one, him who sent me, while it is day. The night is coming when no man can work. During the day, that's the summertime of opportunity. While I'm here, while I'm alive and well and able, that's when I need to do God's work and not put it off, because night's coming for all of us. The night is coming for all of us. The young feel as though life is endless. I felt that way. I felt as though it was an eternal span of opportunity. Now, intellectually, in what little brains I had, I understood that I wasn't going to live forever, but it didn't sink in. I didn't respond in wisdom, and had I done so the way God says that I should, I would have taken that opportunity and prepared for that which ultimately was to come. Now is the time to prepare for the future. Now, I may not be a kid anymore. I don't think any of us in here are children, but still for us right now is the time for us to prepare for what is ahead. You know, Jeremiah made an awesome and a terrifying statement when he said this with regard to the people of God in his day in Jeremiah 8:20. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Is there a response that you or I need to make to God while we have the opportunity? Let's go to the next category here, those so-called rock badgers. The King James says conies, the hyrax, those furry little rabbit-looking creatures. Verse 26, they are a feeble folk. That's a good way of putting it. They are a feeble folk, and yet they make their homes in the crags. They can't stand and fight like we picture what a badger is in our part of the world. They can't stand up and fight and protect themselves. And so what do? The wise thing. They find a place around and in and under rocks and crags that a wolf or a lion can't get into. But they're small. And they're able to scamper away and find a hiding place. I need a hiding place as well. Glenn, thank you for leading that song, Rock of Ages. Cleft for me, let me hide myself in Thee. We are to hide ourselves in the Rock of Ages, and that is the Lord God Almighty, and He's made that possible through the giving of His Son. I love Psalm 46 and verse 1. Our God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Does trouble ever come to us? We're Christians, so certainly we don't have any trouble in life, do we? Now, you know I'm being facetious. Trouble comes to all. But listen to what the psalmist said. Our God is a refuge and strength, abundantly available in trouble. A very present help. He's right here. He's my Rock of Ages. We look around and we see so many signs of our weakness, our vulnerability. I got a notice of another mass shooting on my phone. I get news updates on my phone, and let me tell you, most of those news updates aren't good news, but very disturbing. A highway patrol officer recently killed simply for trying to do his honorable duty. There's sickness, there's death, there's destruction. Well, David said, God is my refuge and my strength. I need to know that. Did you know those who have studied such matters tell us that little babies come into our world with only two instinctive fears? They're not aware of a whole lot. I'm sure maybe more than we realize, but they come into this world with two instinctive fears. They have a fear of loud noises. It startles them, it scares them. And they have a fear of falling. A fear of falling. And that's why you see a mother with that child next to her breast, and the child is sleeping without a care in the world, because he or she knows, I'm being held firmly in protective arms. We need to know that we are held securely by our God. He's at my place to hide. I can run into the crags, into the cliffs, and know that I'm being protected. Now, how do I do that? How do I do that? In Matthew chapter 7, beginning at verse 24, Jesus tells us how. He says, you listen to what I say, and then you follow what I say. And he pictured it this way. He who hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him unto a wise man who builds his house on the rock. There's the rock again that we need. Who builds his house on the rock. Well, the rains came and descended on that house. The floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it stood firm. It continued to stand. Now he said, those who hear my commandments and do them not, I compare them to a foolish man. He built his house on the sand that just washes from under your feet. Sand of the seashore. He built his house on the sand. The rains descended, the floods came, the winds blew and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Great was the fall of it. I want to build on the rock. Look at the next creature, the locusts. Locust, the text tells us, has no king, and yet they advance in ranks. They advance in formation. And as long as they stay in ranks, as long as they're in formation, look at the destructive power of a plague of locusts. One single locust can't do a whole lot. You could easily crush a locust between your fingers. Step on it and destroy it. But think about all of the accounts that we've heard about, that we've read of just how terrifying a plague of locusts can be. And why is that? Because they stick together. They advance in ranks. Oh, is there a lesson for us to learn here? I read something a while back, and I can't remember this, but I can remember what I read about a time during the Dust Bowl situation years ago in this country when there were plagues of locusts in certain parts of the country, and they would consume everything that was green. This is not a joke. I read this, supposedly it's true, that even a woman's clothing hanging out on the line, if it had green stripes in it, the locust would come along and consume the green part of those pieces of clothing. That's how destructive. Leave nothing behind. Church of Christ, would God that we should learn this powerful lesson. Be united. Not just when we're in here. Kids who go to school with other Christian kids ought to feel as though there's a kinship. When we're out on the job, when we are working side by side with other Christians, we ought to feel a kinship and a closeness, and we are stronger together than we are individually. We need that kind of unity. We need to advance the Lord's kingdom, and as we advance, we need to advance in ranks. We need to stay in rank. Military precision. Working together. Folks, if we do that, we could turn this world upside down. It's insane that we not do that. I want to tell you a story. This is a true story. My uncle, my mother's only sister, she had a bunch of brothers, but she had one sister, my Aunt Flora, and she was married to a man, D.T. Hollis, and I love my Uncle D. D.T. was a big man. He was a big, broad-shouldered man with muscles and very tough. He was trained in self-defense, and you know where he worked? He worked in Tuscaloosa, in the asylum for the criminally insane. Now, I don't know if you've ever been inside of one of those places as a visitor, but that's where he worked. He worked in an asylum for the criminally insane. And I can remember Uncle D, when I was just a kid, showing me what he called a come-along hold was. And he showed me on my arm. I can demonstrate it for you when you come out, unless you've got one of those colds that Larry was talking about. By the way, we're not going to observe the Holy Kiss today because of all the colds going on. But if you want me to, I can grab your arm, show you the come-along hold that Uncle D showed me. And when a prisoner would get out of order, Uncle DT could handle the situation. He was big enough, he was well-trained. He'd get him in that come-along hold and get the prisoner under control. My dad asked him one time, he said, D, are you ever afraid that those residents there will get together and gang up on you? He said, no. He said, I'm not. And he said, I'll tell you why. He said, insane people won't cooperate with one another. They won't work together. Church, if we would work together in a united effort, and know that as we do so, we are workers together with God. 2 Corinthians 6 tells us that. Paul says, we're workers together with God. So God's working with me. We're all working together. We could turn this world upside down. Do you know of people who need Christ, who've never been baptized into Christ? Let's work together to reach them. Do you know of brothers and sisters who aren't even any longer attending worship services? You may be thinking, well, somebody surely has contacted them. Do you know that? Let's get together. And let's talk about those who need special encouragement. And I'm not talking about hurting someone's feelings for not attending services. Find out what they're ailing from. If there's some way we can help them and show love to them and encourage them. In Hebrews chapter 10, Brother Neil was talking about that passage this morning. What are you doing? Support one another. Show support for one another. Encourage one another. And a part of the reason for that is because we all need that safety and that encouragement. And he says, don't forsake the assembling of the saints, as some have done, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. That weak person, that person who may be hurting, who may be wounded, how much good would it do to hear from loving brothers and sisters if they hear from us as we lovingly approach? But let's move to the last creature, and that is this spider or lizard. The lizard skillfully grasps with its hands and is in kings' palaces. Authorities tell us, again, this little lizard is about the size of a pinky. It's a small thing. It's a little thing. And yet it has the ability to get into any slum or any palace. They're seen in that part of the world. They're seen everywhere. You can walk in the finest palace in the land in the Near East, in the Middle East, and you'll find lizards from time to time because you just can't keep them out. What does that tell you? It means they're persistent. They're not going to quit. You know, many times when I have failed at something that was truly important, it's because I quit. I gave up. When we teach people they need to repent and be baptized, as people were taught in Acts chapter 2 and verse 38, many won't listen. Many won't listen at first, but they may listen later. I heard Travis say he used to be in sales. And I've read statistics about, generally speaking, the average of stops that usually a salesman has to make at a home before he actually makes the sale. How often, how persistently have you tried? Be as persistent as this little lizard. We need to get tough. Situations in this life are tough, but Christians are tough too. He's designed us so that we can have the wisdom, the doggedness, willing to suffer if need be, in order to do God's will. And guess what? If we do that, eventually we'll make it into the King's palace by His grace. John 14. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. God says, observe the lizard. He gets into places where he really doesn't belong, and God's grace will allow me one day to be in a palace that I could never have earned. If you need to obey the gospel this morning, if you need to come and ask for prayer, whatever your spiritual needs, bring them to Jesus as together we stand and sing.